Hey y'all, welcome back to Let's Be Bold. I'm Demonica, and today we are going to be talking about self leadership. Now, self leadership is something that I have talked to my clients a lot about recently. And we are going to start off by defining it for you guys. I am using a definition taken from Charles Mance from 1986 that says self leadership is identifying your desired experiences and intentionally directing and motivating yourself towards them. The thing about self leadership is that it can get lost. We can lose our sense of self and leading ourselves through trauma and through many other different things. And I think especially recently, perhaps a lot of people have been struggling with this through the pandemic and getting all these messages about how we should conduct ourselves in public places. Do we mask up? Do we not mask up? And so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. But before we get into how we can practice self-leadership, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about internal and external motivation. Now, discerning and knowing the difference between these two can be really helpful because it orients ourselves towards why we are doing something. So internal motivation comes from within us. And for an example, one way that I've been able to practice this is when I was 24 and finishing grad school. I was like, oh, I'm going to move to Colorado. And I did. I just had this sense, I think I talked about this a few episodes ago, that it would be really cool to spend some time here in this state. No one told me to. I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what would people think if I moved to Colorado. I just was like, hey, this is something that I want to do and I'm out of here. External motivation comes from outside sources. And so what that tends to look like is I can't do this because my parents would disapprove, or I can't do this because it is not aligned with what I know my friends expect from me or my church expects from me, things like that. And so if we orient ourselves towards being worried about other people's thoughts on something, then we might be leaning too far in the realm of external motivation. Now, that's not saying that external motivation is a bad thing. Both internal and external motivation is good for us. We need not only a sense of self and positive affirmations for ourselves, we also need verbal feedback from our community, from our friends, both positive and negative. And if you have the type of relationship with your friends where, criticisms are welcomed or recommendations for hey, I think that this could have gone differently. Let's talk about this. Then that's really helpful in relationships. We might call that accountability as well. When we're in a place where our friends can call us out on our nonsense. Okay, so we've talked about internal and external motivation. We've talked a little bit about how we can lose our sense of self-leadership through trauma. Sometimes we can lose it because we spend too much time in that external motivation well. So, for example, I was talking to someone and they were sharing an experience about being told how they should feel about a situation. Right? So if something happens and someone's like, hey, would you be mad about this? Or would you be opposed to me doing XYZ? And when questions are asked like that, it definitely can lead the other person to experience the emotion that they feel like they're expected to feel in that moment. And sometimes we have a habit of doing that from our family of origin, right? If we come up if we grew up in a home where it's like, hey, you shouldn't feel sad about this, or you should feel sad about that, then sometimes we have a harder time in adulthood gaining clarity about how we actually feel about a situation, because we're so used to people telling us how we should feel. And so as we enter like an adult, we are having to make our own decisions about things, right? Like, what kind of apartment do we want to live in? What kind of car do we want to drive? What kind of people do we want to be? What kind of community do we have as far as the people who we want surrounding us? And those decisions can get cloudy when we are so used to having people tell us what we should expect from friends or from our environment. So I want to encourage you guys to spend a little bit of time by yourself this week. So spending time with yourself is really the best way to become more aligned with yourself and to be a better leader to yourself. So here's what I mean by this. The first step in this process would be something like self-awareness or self-knowledge. In our society, it's so easy for us to not spend time with ourselves, right? We come home from work, we turn on the TV, or we get on social media and we look at the reactions that other people have had to what's been going on in the world. For example, like the Winter Olympics is going on right now. And, we might get sucked into, wow, I thought this was a really beautiful performance. And then someone else might be like, wow, points were shaved off for this. And then it's like, oh, maybe I should be more critical of that performance, which if people are in the Olympics, they are super skilled anyway. And so it's really interesting to me when people have criticisms about people who are performing in the Olympics, because it's like the world's biggest stage for athletes. But that's another story. So social media keeps us from engaging in ourselves, or we're listening to music, or we're listening to podcasts. Like, we're flooding ourselves with so much external information that we are just not used to spending times in our own brains and in our own heads. And so when something happens that unexpectedly, for example, let's say like you get in a car accident and people are like, hey, what do you need through this process? Like, how can I help? How can I be supportive? Sometimes we end up not knowing what that is when we need support from people, because we just haven't spent enough time for ourselves to know, okay, this is the support that I need in this situation, or this is what I need help with as far as this emotion that I'm experiencing. So it's important to gain some clarity, find some self-awareness and self-knowledge about what the things that we enjoy and then the type of support that we need when we need that support. Versus, oh, I enjoy doing these things because it's what my friends always do. And you feel like you have to enjoy that thing because all your friends are doing that. And then, the fear of, well, if I don't enjoy this and I confess that to my friends, then they're not going to want to hang out with me anymore because, we spend a lot of time hiking or playing chess or whatever that activity is. Another thing that we can do to help gain greater self-leadership is goal setting and realizing what our desired experiences in life are. So, for example, I have a bucket list of 30 things that I want to do before I turn 30. And one of those things is learning a second language fluently, Spanish specifically. I took it in high school and I've lost it, and I want to spend some time doing that. Becoming more sustainable in my living, so I don't buy paper towels anymore. For example, I just use old t-shirts or old towels and stuff for cleaning, and then I can wash them and reuse them. That's just one example of how I've tried to live sustainably, but it is something that I want as a part of my life as I continue to grow. And so I have set a goal for what that looks like for me. Those are some examples of goals that I have set. And because I know that about myself, if I look and I realize, wow, I'm in community with people who maybe don't have the same values or the same, interest in walking through sustainable practices, then there's no problem with that absolutely at all. However, if I let other people's view of the world, like, it doesn't matter the small things that we do because big name X company has way more waste than, the average individual person. And I let those thoughts influence what I know I want for myself and for the way that I want to engage with life, then that becomes a problem, right? Then I've shifted from a place of internal motivation to a place of external motivation. And then I might feel anxious after that, or I might feel angry after that. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So knowing your goals and your desired life experiences can help us be better leaders to ourselves. And then finally, boundary setting. This is something that's super important, and I am a huge advocate for boundary setting. So here's an example of this in my life, and I may have talked about this before. If I didn't, you're hearing about it today. I value rest. And one of the things that I started doing is I've got a cutoff time for watching TV, and I have a cutoff time for when I'm answering phone calls or answering text message or answering social media notifications, unless you're in my close circle. So what that helps me to do is to get ready for the next day. I get to spend some time with myself. I get to read uninterrupted or play with my dog. She loves cuddles. And that helps me stay in tune with myself, right? Because I love reading, or I might spend some time journaling. I love to write. And so setting those boundaries about who has access to me, especially late in the day and early in the morning, keeps me aligned with who I am versus always in this reactive sense of like, I have to respond to this text, I have to respond to this email if a client is emailing me, when it's like, nope, this is my time. I am not going to allow other people to interfere in this space. So my challenge for you guys this week is if you are someone who struggles maybe knowing what you want out of life, or has a hard time making decisions about, like, how should I dress in this situation, which definitely nothing wrong with trying on outfits, sending it to your friends and being like, hey, what do you think about this, right? Because again, we need and value that external feedback from others. It helps us keep connected to community. It's also part of what makes us human. However, over the long term, if you're someone that really struggles making decisions about what your life wants to look like, what kind of diet you should have, etc., then it might be that you need to spend more solo time with yourself. So the challenge for this week is to go on a date with yourself. I have done this a lot. And for example, I'm thinking about my 25th birthday when I was like, I'm going to go to Boulder. And I spent a weekend in Boulder by myself, and I went on hikes by myself, and I ate meals sitting down at the restaurant by myself. And it was a really nice time to reorient, especially with a significant birthday like 25, which is only significant in the sense of like, woo, I'm old enough to rent a car by myself. I don't know, something random. That's such a random like age marker, but there are limits on how old you can be when renting a car. But anyway, go on a date with yourself, spend some time with yourself, whether that's like being at home and cooking a meal, not with the TV on, because then we're not engaging with ourselves, right? We're engaging with an external source outside of us. Whether that's going on for a walk by yourself, spending time in a journal, spending time in a bookstore. Me, I love doing that. And then thinking about, wow, I used to read books like Charlotte's Web, and it's amazing how my reading interest has changed over time. Charlotte's Web is one of my favorite childhood books, just side note. And whatever that looks like, to gain more alignment with yourself and who you are. And I know that can be scary for people, especially because when we're in those spaces of, wow, I need to all of these emotions come up that we are really good at ignoring and not processing come up for us when we're spending that individual time, but we need that time to align with ourselves. So I look forward to hearing about, feel free to comment if you engage with yourself on a date this week, if you went to a restaurant by yourself and ordered cheese enchiladas. I love cheese enchiladas. I would love to hear about that, and I hope that you guys find some joy in rediscovering some inner parts of who you are.